Play for us, Jasmine. Show us what your kind of people can do with a saxophone." The words hung in the air like poison, cutting through the silence of the classroom. 30 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the only black girl in the room. Some gazes held pity, others barely concealed amusement. Mr. Crawford stood at the front, his thin lips curled into what might have been a smile, but looked more like contempt, a teacher using his authority as a weapon. Jasmine Blake's heart hammered against her ribs as she rose from her seat, her palms slick with sweat. This wasn't just about music anymore. This was about dignity, about ancestry, about proving something she shouldn't have to prove. Her grandfather's voice whispered in her memory, "When they try to shame you, child, that's when you show them your light." As her trembling fingers reached for the tarnished saxophone, a vision flashed before her eyes. Herself on a different stage, bathed in spotlights, playing notes that made judges remove their glasses in disbelief. A future moment or a dream of one. It didn't matter now. What happened next would change everything at Bridgewood Academy forever. The opening notes of Claude Debussy's Rhapsody for Saxophone filled the hall, complex, haunting, and executed with flawless precision. As she played, Jasmine's body swayed slightly, her expression transforming from concentration to joy. The judges' expressions shifted from polite interest to undisguised awe. One of them slowly removed his glasses, as if trying to reconcile what he was hearing with the young black girl standing before them. When the final note faded into silence, Jasmine opened her eyes to see something she'd grown accustomed to: surprise. It was always the same, the surprise that someone who looked like her could play like that. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. It's amazing to see our community tuning in from all over the world. And if you're new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button to join our family of storytellers and truth seekers. All right, back to our story. 6 months earlier, Jasmine Blake had been just another sophomore trying to navigate the hallowed halls of Bridgewood Academy. The prestigious private school sat nestled among manicured gardens and ivy-covered buildings in a wealthy suburb, a far cry from her vibrant Harlem neighborhood where her family had lived for 3 generations. Every morning, Jasmine would wake at 5:30 a.m., carefully styling her braids before putting on the school uniform: navy blazer, pleated skirt, pristine white shirt. By 6:15, she'd be waiting at the bus stop for the first of 2 buses that would carry her across invisible but unmistakable boundaries of race and class to Bridgewood's campus. "Remember why you're there," her father would often say during breakfast. Xavier Blake was a music teacher at a public high school in the Bronx, his hands calloused from decades of playing bass. "You're not there to make them comfortable. You're there to get what you deserve, the best education possible," Jasmine's mother, Lauren, would add, and to show them what a Blake is made of, while packing extra snacks into her daughter's backpack. The Blakes were a family of musicians going back generations. Jasmine's grandfather, Luther Blake, had played saxophone with some of the greatest jazz ensembles of the 1960s, though his name never made it onto album covers the way his white counterparts did. Her grandmother had been a classically trained pianist who taught lessons from their apartment living room. Music wasn't just something the Blakes did, it was who they were. But at Bridgewood, Jasmine kept that part of herself hidden. Not because she was ashamed, never that, but because she'd quickly learned that being one of only 12 black students in the entire school already made her too visible, too scrutinized. Her saxophone stayed in its case at home most days, except for lessons with her grandfather or her sessions with Ms. Bellamy, the renowned jazz saxophonist who had taken Jasmine under her wing at the Community Music Center. At school, Jasmine was quiet but observant, maintaining a solid A average and a small circle of friends. She developed an almost scientific approach to navigating predominantly white spaces. Speak when spoken to, smile enough to seem friendly, but not so much as to seem eager to please, excel but never show off, be visible but not too visible. It was exhausting. And then there was Mr. Crawford's music appreciation class. Frederick Crawford had been teaching at Bridgewood for 27 years. With his tweed jackets and perpetually furrowed brow, he embodied the school's traditionalist approach to education. His classroom walls were adorned with portraits of composers, all European, all male, all white. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Tchaikovsky. The curriculum centered almost exclusively on Western classical traditions, with only a brief, obligatory nod to other musical forms late in the semester. On this particular Tuesday in February, Black History Month, ironically, Mr. Crawford had reluctantly turned his attention to what he called American musical innovations, which was his way of addressing jazz without actually centering Black musicians in the narrative. Jazz emerged in the early 20th century, he explained to the class of 30 students, his voice carrying the same enthusiasm he might use to describe tax accounting. It represents a uniquely American contribution to global music, though of course, it draws heavily on European harmonic structures. Jasmine bit her tongue. Her grandfather had taught her differently, how jazz had emerged from African rhythmic traditions, spirituals, and blues, transformed through the Black experience in America. How it was a music of resistance and resilience, of speaking what couldn't be said in words during times of oppression. Mr. Crawford continued, pointing to a slide showing a sterile musical notation. Notice how the syncopation creates a sense of spontaneity, though of course, within carefully controlled parameters. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "Isn't jazz all about improvisation, though? Not control." Heads turned. It was Denise Washington, Jasmine's best friend at Bridgewood, and one of the few other Black students in their grade. Mr. Crawford's lips tightened. "That's a common misconception, Ms. Washington. While there is an element of improvisation in jazz, it's not the chaotic free-for-all that people often imagine. It requires technical proficiency and theoretical understanding." His gaze swept the classroom, landing on Jasmine. A small, unpleasant smile formed on his lips. "Perhaps Ms. Blake might demonstrate for us, since I understand many of these musical forms originated in her community." The classroom fell silent. Jasmine felt her cheeks burn as every eye turned toward her. The implication was clear in his tone. He wasn't asking her to demonstrate because he thought she could. He was singling her out, using her as an example, assuming her inability would prove his point about the sophistication required. "I didn't bring my saxophone today, Mr. Crawford," she said quietly, her heart pounding. "Ah, you play the saxophone? How fitting." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, as it happens, we have one here." He gestured to a display case in the corner where a tarnished alto saxophone rested, clearly more a decorative piece than a regularly used instrument. "Perhaps you'd care to show the class what jazz improvisation entails." The question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in the veneer of educational opportunity. Behind her, Jasmine heard a few snickers. Across the room, she caught sight of Denise's worried expression. In that moment, Jasmine felt the weight of a choice. She could decline and reinforce whatever assumptions Mr. Crawford had already made about her. Or she could pick up that saxophone, likely poorly maintained and difficult to play, and reveal a part of herself she'd kept carefully guarded at Bridgewood. Either way, she knew something would change after today. Slowly, Jasmine rose from her seat. The classroom seemed to hold its breath as Jasmine crossed to the display case. The saxophone inside was an old Selmer, once a quality instrument, now neglected, its brass dulled with age and disuse. As she lifted it from its stand, she could feel the grime on her fingertips. The mouthpiece looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in years. Any musician would know this instrument would be nearly impossible to play well, which was exactly what Mr. Crawford was counting on. Jasmine knew she had three choices: refuse and face humiliation, attempt to play this neglected instrument and likely fail, or somehow make this moment her own. Her fingers moved automatically, checking the springs and pads. Years of training had made this assessment instinctual. "We're waiting, Ms. Blake," Mr. Crawford said, glancing at his watch. "Though I understand if it's beyond your abilities." Jasmine looked up, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time all semester. "I'll need a new reed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This one is cracked." Surprise flickered across Mr. Crawford's face. Clearly, he hadn't expected her to know enough to check the reed. He fumbled in his desk drawer, producing a small cardboard pack. I suppose we can accommodate that, he said, sliding a fresh reed across his desk. The minutes that followed would later become legend at Bridgewood Academy. Jasmine soaked the reed quickly, assembled the mouthpiece, and positioned her fingers. Then, after a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from generations before her, she began to play. The first notes were tentative, not from lack of skill, but from the poor condition of the instrument. Then, as if the saxophone itself was remembering its purpose, the sound clarified. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting her muscle memory take over as she played the opening of Coltrane's Naima. Complex, soulful, and undeniably masterful. The classroom fell completely silent. Mr. Crawford's smug expression dissolved into confusion, then disbelief. Denise watched with fierce pride, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles whitened. The other students sat transfixed, many of them having never heard jazz played live, certainly not like this. When Jasmine finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before Denise began clapping wildly. Others followed hesitantly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. Only Mr. Crawford remained still, his face unreadable as Jasmine carefully returned the saxophone to its case. That was unexpected, he managed finally, his voice tight. Thank you for the demonstration, Miss Blake. Please take your seat. Have you ever turned someone's attempt to embarrass you into your moment to shine? Share your story of resilience in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this journey with Jasmine, hit that subscribe button to support more stories of triumph over prejudice. Later that afternoon, as Jasmine and Denise walked to the bus stop, the weight of what had happened settled over them. Girl, the look on Crawford's face. Denise laughed, mimicking his shocked expression. I wish I'd recorded it. You absolutely destroyed him. Jasmine smiled faintly, but her hands were still shaking. I shouldn't have had to do that. Denise's laughter faded. No, you shouldn't have. But you did, and you were amazing. She squeezed Jasmine's arm. You've been hiding those skills all this time. Not hiding, Jasmine corrected. Just keeping something for myself. Something that wasn't for them to judge or take. The bus ride home was long, giving Jasmine time to replay the day's events. By the time she reached her stop in Harlem, her initial bravado had given way to a complex tangle of emotions. Pride in her performance, anger at being put in that position, and anxiety about what would come next. The familiar sounds and scents of her neighborhood welcomed her home. Children playing double dutch on the sidewalk, the mouth-watering aroma of Ms. Loretta's famous jerk chicken from the restaurant on the corner, old men playing chess in the park. This was her real world, vibrant, alive with culture and community. Her family's apartment was on the third floor of a well-maintained brownstone. Inside, music was always playing. Today it was Ella Fitzgerald's velvet voice floating from her mother's vintage record player. I'm home, Jasmine called, dropping her backpack by the door. Her mother emerged from the kitchen, dish towel in hand. Hey baby, how was school? Lauren Blake had her daughter's same warm brown eyes and high cheekbones, though her braids were now streaked with elegant silver. It was, Jasmine hesitated. Interesting. Something in her tone made her mother pause. Interesting how, before Jasmine could answer, the door to her grandfather's room opened. Luther Blake moved slowly these days, leaning on a cane, but his presence still filled any room he entered. At 78, his face was deeply lined, each wrinkle telling a story of struggle and joy in equal measure. I know that look, he said, studying his granddaughter. Something happened today. They gathered in the living room, and Jasmine recounted the incident with Mr. Crawford. As she spoke, she watched her family's expressions shift from shock to anger to fierce pride. He tried to shame you with your own heritage, her grandfather said when she finished, his deep voice resonating with controlled anger. Using our music as a weapon against you. He shook his head slowly. Some things don't change, even after all these years. I played Coltrane for him, Grandpa, Jasmine said. Just like you taught me. A slow smile spread across Luther's face. Now that, he said, is what I call resistance. Later that evening, after dinner, Luther beckoned Jasmine to join him in what the family called the music room, really just a converted spare bedroom where instruments, records, and sheet music had accumulated over decades. "Bring your horn," he said, settling into his worn leather armchair. Jasmine retrieved her saxophone case from her bedroom. Unlike the neglected instrument at school, her saxophone gleamed, lovingly maintained. It had been her 16th birthday present, purchased with savings from the entire family. "Play it again," Luther instructed. "Play what you played for that teacher today." Jasmine began Naima again, but her grandfather raised his hand after just a few bars. "No, not like that," he said. "You're playing it technically perfect, but that's not how you played it earlier, is it? When you were standing in that classroom with something to prove." Jasmine looked down at her instrument. "No, sir. So play it like that. Play it with whatever you were feeling in that moment." She closed her eyes, placing herself back in that classroom, feeling again the initial humiliation, the determination, and finally, the power of revealing her true self. This time when she played, the notes carried all of those emotions: defiance, pride, and the weight of representation. When she finished, she opened her eyes to see her grandfather nodding slowly, tears shining in his eyes. "That's it," he said softly. "That's what makes it more than just notes on a page. That's what they can never take from us." He leaned forward. "Let me tell you something, baby girl. There's a reason I started teaching you on Coltrane and not on those classical exercises." Luther shifted in his chair, wincing slightly at the arthritis that had taken residence in his joints decades ago. "When I was coming up, playing clubs in the 50s and 60s, they'd let us entertain them, but they didn't respect us as musicians." "Sound familiar?" Jasmine nodded. "One night, this white critic came to the club, wrote a review saying we played remarkably well, considering, like it was some kind of miracle that black folks could make beautiful music." Luther's eyes grew distant with memory. "Next night, I played a piece so technical, so perfect in its execution that same critic couldn't even speak afterward. Just sat there with his mouth open." He reached out, taking Jasmine's hand in his larger, calloused one. "But you know what I learned over the years? Playing to prove something to them is important sometimes. It breaks down doors. But playing for yourself, for your joy and your ancestors, that's freedom." He squeezed her hand. "Don't you ever forget why we play, Jasmine. Not just to show them, but to remind ourselves who we are." The next morning, Jasmine took her saxophone to school for the first time. It felt like bringing a piece of her true self into a space where she'd always been careful to blend in. As she navigated the marble hallways of Bridgewood, the instrument case felt both like armor and a declaration. In the music appreciation classroom, she could feel the shift immediately. Students looked at her differently, some with new respect, others with curiosity. Denise gave her a thumbs up from across the room. Mr. Crawford entered precisely at 9 a.m., as always, but his usual confident stride seemed diminished. He glanced at Jasmine, noting the saxophone case beside her desk, then quickly looked away. "Today we will continue our exploration of American musical forms," he announced, his voice carefully neutral. "Please open your textbooks to page 187. The class proceeded without incident, but Jasmine could feel tension radiating from her teacher. When the bell rang, he called out, "Ms. Blake, a moment, please." Jasmine signaled to Denise to go ahead, then approached his desk, saxophone case in hand. "Your performance yesterday was impressive," Mr. Crawford said, straightening papers that were already aligned. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My grandfather taught me since I was 7, Jasmine replied. "He played with Duke Ellington once." Mr. Crawford's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see." He cleared his throat. "Well, the spring showcase is coming up in May. Perhaps you might consider performing?" Jasmine studied him carefully. Was this an olive branch, or just an attempt to cover his tracks after yesterday's misstep? "I'll think about it," she said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting the offer. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Ms. Blake, I presumed too much yesterday. That was inappropriate of me. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something." Jasmine nodded once, then left the classroom. Outside in the hallway, Denise was waiting. "What did he want?" "To cover himself," Jasmine replied. "But also, maybe, to recognize something he missed before." That afternoon, instead of heading straight home, Jasmine took the subway downtown to the Harlem Renaissance Music Center, where she had her weekly lesson with Ms. Bellamy. The center was housed in a renovated brownstone, its walls covered with photos of legendary black musicians who had either taught or studied there over its 50-year history. Alexandria Bellamy was one of the center's most celebrated instructors. At 42, she had performed with orchestras around the world and recorded 3 acclaimed jazz albums. More importantly to Jasmine, she was living proof that a black woman could claim space in both classical and jazz worlds on her own terms. As Jasmine set up her saxophone in the practice room, she recounted the previous day's events. Ms. Bellamy listened intently, her expression growing increasingly thunderous. "So he just put you on the spot? Used you as some kind of racial music exhibit?" she finally asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Pretty much," Jasmine confirmed. "But I played Coltrane and shut the whole thing down." Ms. Bellamy's face softened into a proud smile. "Good for you." Then, more seriously, "But it shouldn't have happened in the first place. This is exactly why spaces like this center exist, because traditional institutions have such deeply entrenched biases about who belongs in certain musical traditions." She paced the small room, her bracelets jingling softly. "You know, when I was at Juilliard, a professor once told me I should stick to jazz because my natural rhythm would be better suited for it." She shook her head at the memory. "I played Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 on saxophone at my next recital just to make a point." "Did it change his mind?" Jasmine asked. "Who knows? That wasn't really the point." Ms. Bellamy sat down across from Jasmine. "Look, what happened with your teacher is unfortunately common. These microaggressions, these assumptions, they're exhausting. And it's not your job to educate everyone at that school. But sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is simply to be excellent, unapologetically, in spaces where they don't expect you. To play both Coltrane and Bach, and play them better than anyone else." She leaned forward. "You have that kind of talent, Jasmine. The question is, how do you want to use it?" Ms. Bellamy's question lingered in Jasmine's mind over the following weeks. How did she want to use her talent? As a shield? A weapon? A bridge? Music had always been her sanctuary, her inheritance, not a tool for proving her worth to people who had already underestimated her. "Let's work on something new today," Ms. Bellamy suggested, pulling out a piece of sheet music. "I think you're ready for this." Jasmine glanced at the title, Concerto in E-flat Major by Alexander Glazunov, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the classical saxophone repertoire. "This is a competition piece," Jasmine said, scanning the complex passages. "Yes, it is." Ms. Bellamy's eyes glinted with something like mischief. "The New England Conservatory is hosting its Young Musicians Competition next month. First prize includes a summer intensive program scholarship." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "You think I should enter? I think you could win." Ms. Bellamy pointed to a particularly intricate section. "This passage here, it's where most players falter. But your technical facility, especially after all that Coltrane transcription work, you can handle it." For the remainder of their session, they dissected the concerto's first movement, breaking down its challenging runs and intervals. Despite its difficulty, Jasmine found herself energized by the piece's sweeping drama. "One more thing," Ms. Bellamy said as Jasmine packed up. "For the competition, they usually expect a contrasting piece, something that showcases versatility." "Jazz," Jasmine guessed. "That would be the obvious choice." Ms. Bellamy tilted her head thoughtfully. "But I'm thinking something that fuses both worlds. Maybe we adapt one of your grandfather's compositions for classical interpretation." The idea sent a thrill through Jasmine. He'd love that. Have you ever faced a challenge that made you question how to balance staying true to yourself while navigating others' expectations? Share your journey in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore how we overcome prejudice through excellence and authenticity. At Bridgewood, an uneasy truce had formed between Jasmine and Mr. Crawford. He no longer singled her out in class, and she no longer hid her musical knowledge. When discussions of harmony or composition arose, she contributed thoughtfully, her comments reflecting years of both formal and family education in music theory. Some of her classmates had begun to look at her differently too. Whitney Chun, a violinist who typically moved in Bridgewood's most exclusive social circles, stopped Jasmine after class one day. "Hey, I've been meaning to tell you. What you played that day was incredible," she said, seeming genuinely impressed. "Do you perform anywhere? Like regularly?" "Just at my grandfather's church sometimes, and at the Harlem Renaissance Music Center," Jasmine replied, surprised by the interest. "That's cool. I'd love to hear you play again sometime." These small exchanges accumulated, creating tiny shifts in how Jasmine moved through Bridgewood spaces. She began bringing her saxophone regularly, practicing in the music room during lunch period. Occasionally, other students would wander in to listen, drawn by the sound. But not everyone welcomed this new dynamic. Jasmine noticed how some teachers seemed unsettled by her newfound visibility, how certain students whispered when she passed in the hallway. It was as if by refusing to be small, she had disrupted an unspoken agreement about her place at Bridgewood. 3 weeks after the incident in Mr. Crawford's class, the official announcement for the spring showcase appeared on the school's bulletin board. Jasmine scanned the list of scheduled performers, unsurprised to find her name absent despite Mr. Crawford's suggestion that she participate. "Typical," Denise muttered beside her. "They can't handle someone stealing their spotlight." "It's fine," Jasmine said, though something cold settled in her stomach. "I've got the competition to focus on anyway." That evening at home, her parents noticed her unusual quietness during dinner. "Something on your mind, Jazz?" her father asked, passing her a dish of collard greens. Jasmine explained about the showcase omission. "I don't even know why I care. It's not like I was excited about performing at some stuffy school function." "But you were excluded," her mother observed, "after being told you might be included. That stings no matter what." Her father set down his fork. "You know, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is create your own stage rather than begging for space on someone else's." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have other opportunities, like this competition Ms. Bellamy mentioned. Focus your energy there." He smiled. "When I was starting out, no established band would let me audition. So I formed my own group, booked our own gigs. Eventually, those same bands that shut me out were opening for us." Later that night, Jasmine worked on the Glazunov concerto in her room, drilling the difficult passages until her fingers ached. With each repetition, she channeled her frustration into precision, her disappointment into expression. By midnight, she had conquered a section that had been giving her trouble for days. Just as she was putting her saxophone away, her phone buzzed with a text from Denise. "Check your email." Now, puzzled, Jasmine opened her inbox to find a message from Bridgewood's music department. It was a call for emergency auditions. One of the showcase performers had withdrawn due to illness, creating an unexpected opening. All interested students should prepare a 5-minute piece to audition this Friday, the email concluded. Another text from Denise appeared. "You have to do this." Jasmine stared at her phone, conflicted. Part of her wanted to ignore the opportunity. Why seek validation from a program that had initially excluded her? But another part recognized this as a chance to be heard on her own terms, to claim space rather than waiting for it to be offered. She typed back to Denise, "I'll think about it." The next day, Jasmine sought out Ms. Bellamy for advice. "So they excluded you, and now they need a replacement," Ms. Bellamy summarized after hearing the situation. "And you're wondering if you should even bother?" "Exactly. Why should I?" Ms. Bellamy considered her answer carefully. "When I was about your age, I was invited to a prestigious summer workshop. Not because they valued me, but because they needed to diversify their program to secure certain funding." She crossed her arms. "I almost said no out of pride." "What changed your mind?" "I realized something important. The stage doesn't care why you're on it. Once you're there, it's yours." She fixed Jasmine with an intent gaze. "If you audition and get that spot, what will you do with it? That's the only question that matters." The thought crystallized something in Jasmine's mind. If she earned a place in the showcase, she could perform music that the Bridgewood audience rarely heard, music with roots and resonance beyond their usual experience. She could use that stage to honor her grandfather's legacy. "I'll audition," she decided, "but I'm not playing what they expect." Instead of preparing a standard classical piece, Jasmine spent the next 2 days arranging one of her grandfather's original compositions, a hauntingly beautiful jazz ballad he'd written in the 1960s called Ancestor's Breath. She transformed it into a solo saxophone piece that maintained its soulful core while incorporating elements of classical structure. When Friday arrived, Jasmine waited outside the audition room, saxophone in hand. Through the door, she could hear snippets of other students' performances: Mozart, Debussy, Bach, all perfectly executed, all safely within Bridgewood's traditional musical comfort zone. When her turn came, she entered to find a small panel, the choir director, the band instructor, and Mr. Crawford, sitting center with a clipboard. His expression revealed nothing as she sat up. "What will you be playing for us today, Miss Blake?" the choir director asked. "Ancestor's Breath," Jasmine replied. "It's an original composition by my grandfather, Luther Blake, which I've arranged for solo saxophone." Mr. Crawford's pen paused over his notes. "I don't believe I'm familiar with that piece." "No," Jasmine said, meeting his gaze steadily. "You wouldn't be." Without further explanation, she began to play. The piece opened with a plaintive, meditative theme that gradually built in complexity and emotional intensity. It spoke of history and memory, of pain and transcendence, the musical embodiment of her grandfather's journey and, by extension, her own. As she played the final refrain, Jasmine closed her eyes, no longer concerned with the judges' reactions. This performance wasn't for them. It was for her grandfather, for her community, for herself. The last note lingered in the air, resonant and true. When she opened her eyes, she saw something unexpected on Mr. Crawford's face. Not just surprise, but something that looked almost like genuine respect. "Thank you, Ms. Blake," he said quietly. "We'll notify all applicants of our decision by Monday." The weekend passed in a blur of practice sessions, both for the possible showcase and for the upcoming competition. Jasmine tried not to dwell on the audition outcome, but by Sunday night, her tension was evident enough that her grandfather noticed. "Come sit with me a minute," he said, patting the spot beside him on the sofa. "You're wearing a hole in the carpet with all that pacing." Jasmine sank down next to him. "I'm nervous about tomorrow. About whether you got in, or about what it means either way." She smiled faintly. "Both, I guess." Luther nodded thoughtfully. "You played my song, Denise tells me. I hope that was okay. I arranged it a little differently. Music is meant to be shared, to evolve." His weathered hand covered hers. "You know, when I wrote that piece, it was after I'd been turned away from an audition for the City Symphony. They wouldn't even let me play. Took one look at me and said the position had been filled." Jasmine leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "That's awful." It was. But that night, I sat down with my horn and let all that disappointment and anger flow through me until it transformed into something beautiful. He smiled at the memory. "That's the magic of our music, Jasmine. We've always turned pain into beauty. It's our superpower." Monday morning arrived with a school-wide email announcing the showcase lineup. Jasmine held her breath as she scrolled through the names, stopping when she found it. Jasmine Blake, saxophone solo, Ancestor's Breath. She had made it. But the victory felt complicated, a mixture of validation and lingering resentment that the opportunity had only come through someone else's withdrawal. As she entered Mr. Crawford's classroom that morning, she felt his eyes on her immediately. "Congratulations on securing a spot in the showcase, Ms. Blake," he said as she passed his desk. "Thank you," she replied politely. "Your grandfather's composition, it's quite remarkable. I've done some research on him since the audition." He hesitated, seeming genuinely curious. "Has he recorded any of his work?" The question surprised her. "Some, yes. Most of his early recordings are hard to find now, but he has a few tracks on compilation albums from the Blue Note label." Mr. Crawford made a note on a pad beside him. "I'd be interested in hearing more of his work. Perhaps you could suggest a starting point?" Jasmine studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Was this genuine interest or a performance of open-mindedness to counterbalance his earlier behavior? "I can make you a playlist," she offered finally. His work spans several decades and styles. An awkward silence hung between them, laden with unspoken acknowledgments, of his misconceptions, of her proving them wrong, of the distance still to be bridged. "I would appreciate that," he said eventually. As Jasmine took her seat, Denise shot her a questioning look. She shrugged slightly in response. Whatever Mr. Crawford's intentions, something had shifted in their dynamic. It wasn't friendship or even true understanding, but it was a crack in the wall, a small opening where recognition, if not yet respect, had begun to filter through. With 2 weeks until both the showcase and the competition, Jasmine established a rigorous practice schedule. Mornings before school, she worked on Ancestor's Breath, refining her arrangement for the Bridgewood audience. Afternoons with Ms. Bellamy were dedicated to the Glazunov Concerto and her competition repertoire. Evenings at home often included sessions with her grandfather, who offered insights on the emotional nuances of his composition. One afternoon, Ms. Bellamy surprised her by bringing a visitor to their lesson, a renowned saxophonist who had performed with orchestras worldwide and who happened to be an alumnus of the New England Conservatory. "I've heard good things about you," he told Jasmine after listening to her play a portion of the Glazunov. "You've got something special, not just technical skill, but a voice. That's rare at your age." His encouragement boosted her confidence, but it was something else he said that truly resonated. "The competition judges will have heard dozens of technically proficient performances by the time you play. What will make them remember you is your unique perspective, what you alone bring to the music." As the showcase approached, Jasmine noticed increasing interest from her Bridgewood peers. Students who had never spoken to her before now stopped to ask about her grandfather or her own musical background. Whitney Chin even invited her to join a small chamber ensemble some students had formed. "We play mostly classical stuff, but we've been talking about trying some jazz fusion," Whitney explained. "We could really use your expertise." The invitation was flattering, but Jasmine sensed something beneath it, a subtle exoticism, as if her blackness and jazz knowledge made her an interesting accessory to their primarily white, classical group. She politely deferred, citing her busy competition preparation schedule. These interactions crystallized something Ms. Bellamy had once told her. "Sometimes people will value you for the wrong reasons, for what they think you represent or what they can gain from proximity to you. The trick is knowing your own worth independent of their gaze." The day before the showcase, Jasmine practiced Ancestor's Breath one final time with her grandfather. As the last notes faded, she noticed tears in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "Nothing's wrong," he assured her, wiping his cheeks. "Just hearing you play my music that came from my joy and my pain, and knowing you'll share it in a place where our voices haven't always been welcome. It means something, baby girl. It means we're still here, still creating, still speaking our truth." He took her hands in his. "Tomorrow, when you play for those people, remember something. You're not just playing notes on a page. You're telling our story. Your story." Jasmine squeezed his hands, feeling the weight of legacy and possibility. "I will, Grandpa. I promise." That night, she polished her saxophone until it gleamed and carefully selected her outfit for the showcase. Not the standard black attire most classical musicians wore, but a vibrant dress in a fabric her mother had brought back from a trip to Ghana, adorned with geometric patterns in rich blues and golds. It was a deliberate choice, a visual statement to accompany her musical one. As she finally drifted off to sleep, the title of her grandfather's piece echoed in her mind, Ancestor's Breath. Tomorrow, she would breathe life into his music in a new space, carrying forward a legacy that had survived far greater challenges than one prejudiced teacher at a prestigious school. Tomorrow, she would play not to prove anything to anyone, but to honor the generations whose shoulders she stood upon. The evening of the Bridgewood Academy Spring Showcase arrived with an unexpected hush of anticipation. The auditorium filled with parents, faculty, and students dressed in their finest, programs rustling as they found their seats beneath the warm glow of stage lights. Behind the heavy velvet curtain, performers paced backstage, a nervous energy pulsing through the space. Jasmine stood alone in a corner, her saxophone case open before her as she methodically assembled her instrument. Her vibrant dress stood out among the sea of black attire worn by the other musicians. A few cast curious glances her way, but she remained focused on her preparation ritual, checking the reed, warming up her embouchure, centering her breathing. From the other side of the curtain, she could hear the polite applause as the school's headmaster welcomed the audience. Tonight, we celebrate the remarkable artistic talent nurtured here at Bridgewood Academy. His voice boomed through the sound system. Our music program, under the guidance of dedicated faculty like Mr. Frederick Crawford, continues to uphold the highest standards of classical training and performance. At the mention of Mr. Crawford's name, Jasmine felt a tightening in her chest. Despite their recent, tentative truce, she couldn't forget how he had tried to humiliate her, how he had assumed her incapable of musicianship because of who she was and where she came from. The stage manager appeared, clipboard in hand. 5 minutes, everyone. Places for the opening ensemble. Jasmine would be performing near the end of the program, the penultimate act before the closing chamber orchestra piece. As the showcase began, she retreated to a practice room to stay warmed up and centered, only half listening to the distant sounds of Mozart and Bach filtering through the walls. Her phone buzzed with a text from Denise. Your grandpa just arrived with your parents. Front row, center. We're all here for you. The message calmed her nerves. No matter what happened on that stage tonight, the people who truly mattered were there to support her. She thought of her grandfather sitting in the audience. How rare it must be for him to hear his music performed in such a setting. How meaningful to witness his granddaughter carrying his legacy forward. Another text arrived, this one from Ms. Bellamy. Remember, the stage is yours once you step on it. On every note. I'll be listening from the back row. Time seemed to both crawl and race. Jasmine moved through her warm-up exercises mechanically, her mind already on the performance to come. When the stage manager finally appeared in the doorway, Jasmine was ready. You're up after this piano sonata, she informed her. About 3 minutes. Jasmine nodded, tucking her phone away and gathering her saxophone. As she made her way to the wings, she could hear the current performer, Whitney Chun, playing Chopin with flawless precision. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Whitney took her bow and exited the opposite side of the stage. Mr. Crawford appeared at the podium to introduce the next act. Our next performer offers something a bit different tonight, he began, his voice carrying a note of what might have been genuine curiosity. Jasmine Blake will perform an original composition titled Ancestor's Breath, written by her grandfather, Luther Blake, and arranged by Jasmine herself for solo saxophone. A murmur rippled through the audience, perhaps at the departure from the standard classical repertoire, or perhaps at the mention of a student performing an arrangement of her own creation. Please welcome to the stage, Jasmine Blake. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine stepped into the light. The stage felt vast and intimate all at once, hundreds of eyes fixed upon her as she moved to center stage. She adjusted her microphone, positioned her music stand, and then, on impulse, glanced toward the front row. There sat her family. Her mother elegant in a deep purple dress, her father beaming with pride, and her grandfather, regal in a suit that had seen decades of performances, his eyes shining with emotion. Beside them was Denise, giving a subtle thumbs up. Jasmine raised her saxophone, closed her eyes for just a moment, and began to play. The opening notes of Ancestor's Breath filled the auditorium, soft, plaintive, questioning. As she had practiced countless times, she let the melody unfold like a story being told, each phrase building on the last. The piece moved through emotions like chapters, from melancholy to determination, from struggle to triumph. In the middle section, where her grandfather had originally written a complex improvisational passage, Jasmine had arranged a sequence that blended classical techniques with jazz harmonies. Her fingers flew over the keys, each note precise yet flowing, technical yet soulful. As she played, Jasmine felt a strange sensation, as if she were somehow both fully present in the moment and also witnessing it from outside herself. She could sense the audience's reaction, the way the initial polite attention had shifted to genuine engagement. Even those who might not fully understand the cultural context of the music could feel its emotional truth. When she reached the final movement, the part her grandfather called the resolution, Jasmine poured everything into it. All the frustration of being underestimated, all the pride in her heritage, all the joy of creation. The melody soared, pulling the audience into its ascent before finally returning to a gentle, affirming conclusion, like a conversation that had said everything that needed to be said. The final note hung in the air, resonating in the perfect acoustics of the auditorium. For a moment, there was absolute silence, that breathless pause that comes when an audience has been truly moved. Then, from the front row, her grandfather rose to his feet, applauding with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Her parents stood beside him, followed by Denise. Like a wave, the standing ovation spread through the auditorium until nearly everyone was on their feet. Through tear-blurred vision, Jasmine noticed Mr. Crawford at the side of the stage, his expression unreadable but his hands coming together in what appeared to be genuine appreciation. Near the back, she caught sight of Ms. Bellamy, beaming with fierce pride. As the applause continued, Jasmine took her bow, saxophone held high in one hand. In that moment, she wasn't just Jasmine Blake, student at Bridgewood Academy. She was the culmination of generations, a musical legacy that refused to be diminished or denied. Has music or art ever allowed you to express something about your identity that words alone couldn't capture? Share your experience in the comments section below. And if this story of resilience and cultural pride resonates with you, please subscribe to support more narratives that celebrate our diverse journeys and triumphs. The aftermath of Jasmine's performance unfolded in ways she couldn't have anticipated. As she left the stage, other performers stopped her to offer congratulations. Whitney Chun, who had played Chopin so perfectly, approached with wide eyes. I've never heard anything like that before, she admitted. Would you teach me about jazz someday? I've always wanted to learn, but my classical teachers discouraged it. In the lobby after the showcase, Jasmine found herself surrounded by audience members, parents, students, even faculty, all wanting to express their admiration. Some asked about her grandfather's music, others about where she had learned to play with such emotional depth. Through the crowd, Jasmine spotted Mr. Crawford speaking with her grandfather, an unexpected sight that made her pause. She made her way toward them, catching fragments of their conversation. Criminal that your work isn't better known, Mr. Crawford was saying. The harmonic structure in that third movement alone. Luther Blake nodded graciously. Different times, different opportunities. But the music survives. Indeed it does, Mr. Crawford agreed, noticing Jasmine's approach. Ms. Blake, Jasmine, your performance tonight was extraordinary. Truly one of the finest we've had at Bridgewood in my tenure. The compliment was delivered without qualification, without surprise, simply as a statement of fact. Jasmine searched his face for any sign of insincerity, but found none. Thank you, she replied, genuinely. Your grandfather has been educating me about the history of jazz composition, Mr. Crawford continued. I'm embarrassed to admit how limited my knowledge has been. We should discuss incorporating more diverse musical traditions into our curriculum. Before Jasmine could respond, the department head appeared, practically glowing with excitement. Jasmine, I've just received word. There's a representative from the New England Conservatory in the audience tonight. She was here to watch another student, but she was absolutely taken with your performance. She'd like to speak with you about their summer program. Jasmine's heart leaped. But I'm already registered for their competition next month. Yes, and she's one of the judges. She said that based on what she heard tonight, she's extremely interested in your application. This could be quite significant for your future opportunities. As the department head led her toward the conservatory representative, Jasmine glanced back at her grandfather and Mr. Crawford, two musicians from different worlds, different generations, finding common ground in the universal language of music. The next morning, Jasmine's performance was the talk of Bridgewood Academy. In the hallways, students who had never spoken to her before nodded in recognition. In the cafeteria, a group of freshmen asked if they could sit with her and Denise. You're famous now, Denise teased as they walked to music appreciation class. Hardly, Jasmine laughed. But it feels different today, like something shifted. Mr. Crawford was already in the classroom when they arrived, rearranging some of the portraits on the wall. Jasmine noticed with surprise that he had added 3 new frames, photographs of John Coltrane, Duke Ellington, and Nina Simone now hung alongside Bach and Beethoven. When he turned and saw her noticing the change, he offered a small, almost embarrassed smile. "Long overdue," he said simply. Class began with an announcement. "I'd like to inform everyone that the music department will be expanding our curriculum next year to include a more comprehensive study of jazz, its history, and its significant contributors. We'll also be launching a jazz ensemble for interested students." As Mr. Crawford outlined the new initiative, Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her was gratified by this change, knowing it would benefit future students. Another part remained wary. One performance hadn't erased years of institutional bias, and she was under no illusion that structural change happened so easily. But something had begun. A door had been opened, if only slightly. After class, Mr. Crawford asked Jasmine to stay behind. When the room had emptied, he spoke with unexpected candor. "I owe you an apology, Miss Blake. A real one, not the half measure I offered before." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, but pressed on. "When I asked you to play that day, it was with the expectation of failure. I wanted to make a point about technical training, but the point I was really making was about my own prejudices." He met her eyes directly. "I was wrong. Not just about you specifically, but in my assumptions more broadly." Jasmine considered his words carefully. "Thank you for saying that. But you know this is bigger than just one student or one teacher, right?" "Yes," he acknowledged. "It's systemic, institutional. I'm beginning to understand that better now." He gestured to the new portraits on the wall. "This is just a start, but I am committed to doing better. Your grandfather has agreed to come speak to the department about jazz history next month. And I wondered if you might consider helping develop the curriculum for our new jazz program." The offer surprised her. "I'm still a student," she pointed out. "Yes, but one with insights and experiences our faculty largely lacks. Your perspective would be valuable and compensated, of course. Think about it." Jasmine nodded, not yet ready to commit but appreciating the genuine effort. "I will." 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood on another stage, this one at the New England Conservatory's historic Jordan Hall. The Young Musicians Competition had drawn talented performers from across the country, many from prestigious arts high schools and conservatory prep programs. As she waited in the wings for her turn, Jasmine recalled Ms. Bellamy's advice. "Remember why you play, not just to show them, but to remind yourself who you are." When her name was called, she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. In the audience sat her entire family, Ms. Bellamy, Denise, and, surprisingly, Mr. Crawford, who had requested permission to attend in support of his student. Jasmine began with the Glazunov Concerto, executing its technical challenges with precision and grace. For her contrasting piece, she performed a new arrangement, one that wove together elements of her grandfather's ancestors' breath with classical structures, creating something that was neither strictly jazz nor classical, but authentically hers. The judges' deliberation took longer than expected. When they finally emerged, the lead judge approached the microphone with an unusual announcement. "Before we reveal our decisions, I'd like to note something remarkable about this year's competition. We've heard extraordinary technical proficiency today, as we do every year. But we've also heard something rarer, a unique musical voice, a perspective that challenges our notions of genre and tradition." Jasmine held her breath as the judge continued. "The first prize, which includes a full scholarship to our summer intensive program, goes to Jasmine Blake." The applause was thunderous. As Jasmine accepted her award, she spotted her grandfather in the audience, tears once again streaming down his face. Beside him, her parents beamed with pride. Even Mr. Crawford was on his feet, applauding without reservation. Epilogue. 1 year later, Jasmine stood before a group of young musicians at the Harlem Renaissance Music Center. The community program she had developed with Ms. Bellamy, Ancestors and Innovators, had drawn students from across the city, primarily black and brown youth eager to explore the connections between classical techniques and their own cultural musical traditions. Music has never existed in neat, separate boxes, she told them. The boundaries between jazz and classical, between high art and popular forms, were largely created to exclude certain voices and elevate others. She gestured to the wall behind her, where photographs of musical pioneers from diverse backgrounds hung alongside classical composers. Your challenge is to find your authentic voice, one that honors where you come from while creating something new. Among her students was a shy 13-year-old girl who reminded Jasmine of herself, technically gifted but hesitant to stand out. After class, Jasmine took extra time with her. "May I ask you something, Miss Blake?" the girl ventured. "My school orchestra teacher doesn't think jazz techniques belong in our performances. He says it's not proper. What should I do?" Jasmine smiled, remembering her own journey. "Play your truth," she advised. "Play it so beautifully they can't ignore it. And remember, you don't need anyone's permission to be excellent on your own terms." As the students packed up their instruments, Jasmine's phone chimed with a message from Mr. Crawford. The Bridgewood Jazz Ensemble, now in its second year, with a curriculum she had helped develop, had just won a regional competition. He had attached a photo of the diverse group of students holding their trophy, along with a simple message: "Your legacy continues." "Thank you." Later that evening, Jasmine visited her grandfather at home. His health had declined somewhat over the past year, making it harder for him to play, but his mind remained sharp, his musical insights as profound as ever. "I brought you something," she said, handing him a slim package. Inside was a professionally printed score, Ancestor's Breath, with Luther Blake credited as composer and Jasmine Blake as arranger. Below the title was a publisher's imprint. The piece had been accepted into a major catalog of contemporary works for saxophone. "Now music students everywhere might play your composition," she explained. "Your voice will reach places it was once denied." Luther ran his fingers over the printed notes. His music, his story, now permanent, undeniable. "You did that," he said softly. "You opened a door they tried to close on me." "No," Jasmine corrected gently. "We did it together. Your breath, my fingers. Ancestors and innovators." As the evening light faded outside the window, grandfather and granddaughter sat side by side, no longer needing words to express what music had already said, that some songs refuse to be silenced, that art born from struggle carries a special power, and that every note played in the face of prejudice becomes an act of revolution, an affirmation of existence, a celebration of survival. Each generation breathing life into the next, the music ever evolving but never forgetting where it came from. If you've been moved by Jasmine's journey from prejudice to triumph, please hit that subscribe button to join our community. Each story we share is a testament to resilience, a celebration of cultural pride, and a step toward understanding. Share your thoughts in the comments below about a time when your own talents or heritage were underestimated and how you responded. Your voice matters in this conversation. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video.